On the day we buried my husband, his boss pressed a crumpled note into my palm instead of shaking my hand. It warned me not to drink anything in my own home. Later that night, as my stepson handed me a cup of soothing herbal tea with a concerned smile, the truth hit me. My fatigue was not grief. It was poison. Now I have to play the helpless widow to survive long enough to destroy them. My name is Elena. At 42 years old, I had spent 2 decades as an architect designing skyscrapers that could withstand earthquakes and hurricanes. Yet standing before the ebony casket of my husband, I felt structurally unsound. David was gone. The formidable chief financial officer of Novatech was reduced to a memory in a box, and I was the widow on display. The funeral was an extravagant affair held under a weeping gray sky. Rain hammered relentlessly against the black canopy, drowning out the murmurs of the Silicon Valley elite who had gathered to pay their respects. It felt cold, a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I looked around at the sea of faces, business partners, rivals, social climbers, and realized I was entirely alone. I was an outsider in my own family, a spectator watching a tragedy play out from behind thick glass. My stepson, Brandon, stood to my right. At 25, he was the spitting image of his father, minus the warmth that had made David my sanctuary. Brandon and his fiancée, Tiffany, were putting on the performance of a lifetime. They hovered over me like vultures disguised as doves. Tiffany, with her perfectly coiffed hair and tear-stained cheeks, kept rubbing my back. Her touch made my skin crawl. "You need to hydrate." "Mom," Brandon urged, his voice thick with performative concern. He pressed a bottle of water into my shaking hands. "Please, for me. You have barely touched a thing all day." I took a sip, mostly to make him stop staring. The liquid tasted metallic, but everything tasted wrong lately. My head was spinning in slow, nauseating circles. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, heavy and numb, and my fingertips tingled with a persistent pins and needles sensation. I tried to focus on the priest's eulogy, but the words swam together. I told myself this was just grief. It was just the shock. It was just the side effects of the strong sedatives Brandon had insisted I take this morning to get through the ordeal. Then the crowd parted. Marcus Sterling approached. As the chief executive officer of Novatech and David's oldest friend, Marcus usually carried an air of charismatic authority. Today, however, he looked severe. His face was drawn, his eyes hard and devoid of the sympathy I expected. He didn't offer the usual warm embrace. He looked like a man walking into a war zone. Brandon turned away for a brief moment to accept the condolences of a weeping board member. In that split second of distraction, Marcus moved with startling aggression. He didn't offer his hand. Instead, he grabbed my elbow, his grip tight enough to cause pain, and pulled me sharply into the shadow of a large marble angel, away from the prying eyes of the congregation. "Marcus, you are hurting me," I gasped, my voice weak. He didn't let go. He leaned in close, his face inches from mine, blocking out the rain and the mourners. "Listen to me very carefully." "Elena," he whispered, his voice a frantic rasp. "David did not die of a heart attack. I found the report in his encrypted email this morning." My breath hitched, the world tilted on its axis. "You need to come to my office tonight," Marcus continued, his eyes darting to where Brandon stood. "And whatever you do, do not eat or drink anything Brandon gives you. Do you understand me?" Before I could process the horror of his statement, Brandon was there. He appeared over Marcus's shoulder, his eyes narrowing with sharp suspicion as he looked from Marcus's gripping hand to my pale face. "Everything all right over here?" Brandon asked. The tone was polite, but the underlying threat was unmistakable. Marcus released me instantly, his demeanor shifting effortlessly to professional detachment. "Just offering my support. Brandon, your father was a great man. We are all going to miss him." He nodded once, curtly, and disappeared back into the rain without another word. I stood there, trembling violently. Brandon wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. It felt like a coil tightening around my neck. "He is acting strange, isn't he?" Brandon murmured, his eyes lingering on Marcus's retreating back. He turned his gaze to me, his expression softening into that mask of filial devotion. He lifted a fresh glass of water from a passing waiter's tray. "Here, Elena, you look like you are about to faint. Drink this." I looked at the water. I looked at the hand offering it. A cold, paralyzing fear washed over me, sharper than the grief, clearer than the fog in my brain. I was not safe. The car ride home was an interrogation disguised as comfort. Brandon and Tiffany did not let the silence settle for even a second. They kept pressing me about the legal documents. Brandon insisted that I needed to sign the power of attorney immediately to avoid complications with the estate taxes. Tiffany kept mentioning the life insurance payouts, claiming that signing everything over to their management would reduce my burden. Their urgency was palpable, a desperate rhythm underlying their soft voices. When we arrived at the villa, the structure I had designed with my own hands felt alien. The sharp angles and floor-to-ceiling glass walls, which once represented freedom and light, now loomed over me like the bars of a luxurious cage. I felt trapped. Inside. Brandon guided me to the sofa and disappeared into the kitchen. He returned moments later with a steaming mug. He told me it was a special herbal tea, a family recipe guaranteed to help me sleep without dreams. He held it out to me, his eyes fixed on mine. "Drink it while it is hot," he insisted. It was not a suggestion. I brought the cup to my lips, the steam clouding my vision. Marcus's warning echoed violently in my head. Just as I tilted the cup, Brandon's phone rang in his pocket. He turned away to answer it, distracted for a brief moment. I seized the opportunity and dumped the hot brown liquid into the soil of the large potted plant beside me. When he turned back, I feigned swallowing the last drop and set the empty cup down. He smiled, satisfied that his medication was in my system. I told him I felt dizzy and needed to lie down. I retreated to the master bathroom and locked the door with trembling fingers. I turned on the faucet and splashed freezing water onto my face, trying to shock myself into clarity. I looked into the mirror and saw a stranger. My skin was not just pale, it was a sickly gray. I ran my hand through my hair and a large clump came away in my fingers. I stared at the dead strands in the sink. The exhaustion, the numbness in my extremities, the hair loss. It wasn't grief. I was being slowly poisoned. I cracked the door open to listen. Downstairs, the hushed voices of my stepson and his fiancée drifted up the stairwell. Brandon sounded frantic. He whispered about a debt of $5 million and how he was out of time. Tiffany's voice was sharper. She told him to calm down and said that the old hag was walking right into the trap. She said I would be gone soon enough. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I could not stay in this house tonight. If I closed my eyes, I would never open them again. I moved quickly. I arranged pillows under the duvet to mimic the shape of a sleeping body. I shed my funeral clothes and dressed in black slacks and a dark sweater. I opened the bedroom window. The rain was still falling. I climbed onto the wet sill and found the sturdy trellis I had designed years ago. I descended into the darkness of the backyard, slipping on the wet grass but keeping my balance. I did not dare take my car. I ran through the neighbor's yard to the main street and flagged down a passing taxi. I told the driver to take me to the Novatech headquarters. As the car sped away into the night, I clutched my chest. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might fail, but for the first time in months, I was wide awake. The executive suite on the top floor of Novatech was a fortress of glass and steel, completely isolated from the chaos I had left behind. Marcus stood by the window looking out at the city lights. But he was not alone. Sitting at the conference table was a man who looked like he had been carved out of rough granite. Marcus introduced him as Frank, a private investigator who specialized in corporate espionage and high-stakes background checks. Frank did not offer a handshake. He simply nodded and gestured for me to sit. The air in the room was sterile and cold, a sharp contrast to the humid, floral scent of the funeral home. Marcus sat down and turned his laptop toward me. He told me I needed to watch something, but he warned me it would be difficult. He pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing my husband, David. He was sitting in his home office, the same room where I had found him dead just 48 hours ago. In the video, David looked hauntingly gaunt. His skin was sallow, and his breathing was labored. He spoke directly into the camera lens, his voice a rasping whisper. He said that he suspected Brandon was tampering with his heart medication. He held up a pill bottle and noted that the texture of the tablets felt slightly off, chalkier than usual. He said he did not want to believe his own son would hurt him, but he felt his life slipping away day by day. The video ended, freezing on David's terrified eyes. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Frank leaned forward, his voice gravelly and devoid of emotion. He explained that David had been smart enough not to go to our family physician. Our doctor was Brandon's golf partner and had dismissed David's recent symptoms as stress. Instead, David had couriered blood samples directly to Frank's private lab. Frank slid a toxicology report across the mahogany table. He pointed to the highlighted row. David had not died of a heart attack. He had been dosed with a massive amount of digitoxin. It was a drug that increased heart contraction, and in high doses, it caused cardiac arrest that looked exactly like natural heart failure to an unsuspecting coroner. But Frank was not finished. He pulled out a second sheet of paper. He told me that Marcus had given him a hair sample from my hairbrush the previous day. The results were unequivocal. My blood and hair showed dangerous levels of arsenic accumulation. The realization washed over me with improved clarity. The constant headaches that blinded me in the afternoons, the numbness in my fingers and toes, the sudden nausea I had attributed all of it to the stress of my architectural projects and the emotional toll of David's illness. I was wrong. I was being poisoned. Every cup of tea, every special vitamin supplement Brandon had handed me with a smile was a dose of death. Marcus took over, explaining the motive. He projected a financial dossier onto the wall. Brandon was not just living a lavish lifestyle, he was drowning. He had leveraged his assets to invest in volatile cryptocurrency markets and lost everything. He owed $5 million to a loan shark syndicate that did not accept excuses. He needed liquid cash, and he needed it immediately. Frank outlined the legal grimness of their plan. If I died right after David, the police would likely rule it a suicide driven by grief or a sudden health collapse due to shock. Under the laws of inheritance, if I died without updating my will or utilizing the trust immediately, the entire estate, David's fortune, and my own assets would pass to the next of kin. That was Brandon. I sat there, frozen. I remembered teaching Brandon how to tie his shoes. I remembered sitting up with him when he had the flu. I had treated him like the son I never had. I had defended him when David called him irresponsible. And all that time, he had been looking at me not as a mother figure, but as an obstacle between him and a payout. He did not just kill his father, he was actively erasing me to pay a gambling debt. The sorrow that had weighed me down for days suddenly evaporated. In its place, a cold, hard rage settled in my gut. It was sharp and clarifying. I looked at the two men who were waiting for me to break down. I did not shed a tear. Marcus reached for his phone to call the police commissioner, but I stopped him. I told him no. If we called the police now, Brandon might claim it was an accident, or he might pin it all on Tiffany. He had the best lawyers money could buy. I did not want an investigation that dragged on for years. I wanted him destroyed. I told Frank and Marcus that I was going back to the house. I would play the role of the grieving, dying widow one last time. I wanted to catch them in the act so that when the handcuffs clicked, there would be absolutely no escape. Frank laid out the logistics of my return to the lion's den with the cold precision of a general planning a siege. He explained that we could not simply arrest Brandon based on the toxicology report alone. A good defense attorney would argue that David took the drugs himself, or that I had administered them, to ensure a conviction that would put Brandon and Tiffany away for life. We needed indisputable proof of intent. We needed to catch them in the act of trying to finish me off. Marcus had already leveraged his influence to contact the Economic Crimes Unit and the Major Case Squad. They were on standby, parked in unmarked vans 2 streets away from my villa, waiting for the signal. However, the bridge between suspicion and arrest was me. I had to go back into that house, act as though I was completely oblivious to their treachery, and present myself as a vulnerable target. Frank handed me a black blouse from a pile of clothes his assistant had procured. He pointed to the second button from the top. It looked like a standard Onyx button, but it housed a high-definition microcamera and a microphone. Then, he instructed me to take off my left shoe. He slid a thin, wafer-like GPS tracker under the insole. I was now a walking surveillance unit. Marcus looked pale. He paced the length of the office, running a hand through his hair. He stopped in front of me, his voice tight with anxiety. He told me that this was too dangerous and that we should just hand the evidence we had to the authorities and hope for the best. He looked at the toxicology report again and shook his head, terrified that I might actually consume the poison this time. I stood up and smoothed the front of the blouse. I looked Marcus in the eye and told him that there was no other way. They had murdered my husband in cold blood for money. They had watched him wither away and pretended to care. I told Marcus that I needed to be the one to close the trap. I had to be the one to ensure they never hurt anyone again. For the next hour, Frank coached me on my performance. I had to simulate a mental breakdown. I needed to appear disoriented, possibly suffering from temporary memory loss due to shock, and dangerously compliant. My narrative was simple. I was too weak to carry on. I wanted to join David, and I wanted to sign the assets over to Brandon to rid myself of earthly burdens. While we rehearsed, Frank's technical team was busy on their laptops. They were hacking into the smart home security system of my villa. David had installed state-of-the-art cameras in every room, including the kitchen and dining area, years ago. Ironically, the security system Brandon thought protected him was now being turned into a live broadcast for the police. One of the technicians gave a thumbs up. They had total visual control of the house. I arrived back at the villa just as the sun was breaking over the horizon. The sky was a bruised purple, matching the exhaustion in my bones. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The house was silent for a moment before heavy footsteps came thundering down the stairs. Brandon and Tiffany looked like they had not slept. Their eyes were wild, and for a split second, I saw pure, unadulterated rage on their faces. They had clearly spent the night searching for me, terrified that their golden goose had flown the coop. But as soon as they saw my disheveled state, my wet shoes, my erratic breathing, they swapped their masks back on. Brandon rushed forward, grabbing my shoulders. He demanded to know where I had been. He said they were sick with worry. I let my body go limp in his grip. I sobbed, letting the tears flow freely. I lied and told them I had walked all the way to the cemetery because I could not stand being in the house without David. I told them I had spent the night talking to his grave. Tiffany softened immediately, exchanging a quick, relieved glance with Brandon. They thought I was unhinged. They thought I was broken. I looked at Brandon, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. I told him that he was right. I told him I was too tired to fight anymore. I said I was ready to sign the power of attorney and the insurance papers. I told them I would sign everything at noon, right after we had a family lunch. I called it a farewell lunch. Brandon tried to hide his excitement, but his hands twitched. He agreed instantly. He said that was a wonderful idea. He promised that after lunch, he would handle everything, and I could finally rest. I looked at him and nodded, knowing exactly what kind of rest he had in mind. The stage was set. The morning dragged on with a suffocating heaviness. The air in the villa felt stagnant, charged with an unspoken violence that only I could perceive. I sat in the living room, wrapped in a cashmere shawl, watching Brandon and Tiffany through the new lens Marcus and Frank had given me. I no longer saw a grieving son and a supportive daughter-in-law. I saw two predators pacing a cage, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every glance they exchanged was a calculation. Every touch was a rehearsal for the murder they were about to commit. Tiffany announced she was going to the kitchen to prepare lunch. She tried to sound cheerful, but her voice was tight. I watched her walk away, her heels clicking on the marble floor. A moment later, a tiny burst of static sounded in my right ear, followed by Frank's voice. It was clear and steady, grounding me in reality. He told me that he had a visual on the subject. He said Tiffany had just removed a small, unlabeled glass vial from her purse. She was checking the doorway, scanning for witnesses. Frank told me to breathe and stay in character. I cleared my throat and called out to her, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing. I asked if she could make the mushroom cream soup. I told her it was David's favorite meal, and I wanted to feel close to him one last time. It was a calculated request. I knew the thick, earthy texture of the soup would easily conceal the bitterness of the poison and the cloudiness of any powder. From the kitchen, Tiffany agreed enthusiastically. She was likely relieved. I was making it easy for them. While Tiffany was stirring the lethal concoction, Brandon decided he could not wait any longer. He marched into the living room carrying a thick stack of documents. He placed them on the coffee table with a thud that made me jump. He sat close to me, too close, invading my personal space. He uncapped a fountain pen and pressed it into my hand. He told me that we needed to get this done now so I could relax later. He pointed to the signature lines, his finger tapping impatiently against the paper. I took the pen, but I did not sign. I let my hand shake violently. The nib scratched uselessly against the page, leaving a jagged trail of ink. I gasped and let the pen slip from my fingers. It clattered onto the glass table and rolled onto the floor. Brandon let out a sharp sigh of frustration. He picked up the pen and shoved it back into my hand. He told me to focus. He said it was just a signature. I looked up at him, widening my eyes in feigned confusion. I asked him why our family lawyer was not here. I told him that David always insisted on having a witness for legal matters. I said I wanted everything to be formal and dignified, just like his father would have wanted. Panic flared in Brandon's eyes. He could not bring a lawyer here. A lawyer would ask questions. A lawyer would see my condition. He improvised a clumsy lie. He told me the lawyer was out of the country on vacation and could not be reached. He claimed the bank needed the authorization immediately, or the accounts would be frozen for months due to the investigation. He said we did not have time for formalities. I looked at him, studying the sweat beading on his forehead. He was terrified of losing the money, but he was even more terrified of being caught. I pretended to surrender. I lowered my head and told him I understood. I said I would sign everything, but not on an empty stomach. I told him I wanted to eat the soup Tiffany was making first. I said I wanted our last meal together to be complete before I handled the business. Brandon hesitated, looking toward the kitchen, then back at me. He nodded slowly. He thought he had won. He did not know he had just agreed to his own downfall. The dining room table was set with the fine china we usually reserved for Thanksgiving or Christmas. The aroma of wild mushroom soup filled the air, rich and earthy, a scent that used to make my mouth water. Today, however, it smelled suffocating. It smelled like the morgue. I sat at the head of the table, my hands resting on the cold mahogany, watching the steam rise from the tureen. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that I prayed my microphone would not pick up. Tiffany walked in from the kitchen carrying a single bowl on a silver tray. She bypassed the empty spots and placed it directly in front of me with delicate precision. She did not serve herself. She did not serve Brandon. She stood back, smoothing her skirt, and offered me a smile that was terrifyingly sweet. "Eat up, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with artificial honey. "I made it just the way you like it, plenty of cream." I looked down at the creamy gray liquid. To the naked eye, it was just soup, but I knew better. It was a weapon. Suddenly, Frank's voice crackled in my ear, sharp and commanding. "Do not eat yet." Elena, we need to lock this down. Make them confirm that specific bowl is intended for you and no one else. Get her to handle it again. I took a breath, steeling myself. I reached for the spoon, letting my hand tremble violently. I lifted the utensil halfway to my mouth and then let it clatter back into the bowl, splashing a few drops of hot liquid onto the tablecloth. I recoiled, feigning weakness. It is too hot, I whined, my voice thin and pathetic. I cannot take it. Tiffany sighed, a flash of annoyance crossing her face before she reset her mask. She stepped forward. Do you want me to put an ice cube in it? No, I said, looking up at her with wide, pleading eyes. Just blow on it for me, Tiffany. My hands are shaking too much to stir it. Please. For a second, she froze. Her eyes darted to Brandon, then back to the soup. She knew exactly what was in there. If she tasted even a drop, she would end up on a slab next to David. She leaned over, keeping her face a safe distance from the steam, and blew gently on the surface of the liquid. She was careful, meticulously so, ensuring not a single drop touched her lips. There, she said, pushing the bowl back toward me. It should be perfect now. Eat it while it is warm. It will make you feel better. I looked at the bowl. Then I shifted my gaze to Brandon. He was watching me with the intensity of a starving animal. I needed to twist the knife. I needed to see if there was any humanity left in him, or if the boy I raised was truly dead. I remember when you were 10 years old, I said softly. You had the chicken pox. You were so sick you could not stop crying. I sat by your bed for 3 nights straight. I made you this exact soup because it was the only thing you could swallow. Do you remember that? Brandon's jaw tightened. He picked up his water glass and took a long gulp, refusing to meet my eyes. And when you graduated, I continued, pushing the memories into the space between us. Your father was so proud. He told everyone that you were going to be the one to take the company to new heights. He trusted you more than anyone. That is enough, Brandon snapped. The veneer of the grieving son cracked. He slammed his glass down, water sloshing over the rim. That is ancient history. Stop stalling. Eat your soup and sign the papers. You said you were tired. You said you wanted to rest. Well, this is how you get to rest. I stared at him. The cruelty in his voice was absolute. He was not just impatient, he was eager. I looked him straight in the eyes, dropping the act of the confused widow for just a fraction of a second. Brandon, do you remember how much your father loved you? I asked, my voice steady. Why would you do this? The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. For a moment, Brandon flinched. His eyes widened slightly as if he had heard the accusation beneath the words, but then he shook his head, dismissing it. He thought I was delirious. He thought I was asking why he was rushing me, or why fate had taken his father. He had no idea I was asking why he had decided to murder us. Just eat the soup. Elena, he muttered, looking away. It is for your own good. I lifted the heavy silver spoon one last time. My hand trembled, sending ripples through the creamy gray liquid that promised my death. I brought it to my lips, feeling the heat radiate against my skin. But then I stopped. I lowered the spoon slowly and deliberately back into the bowl. I looked up, and for the first time that day, I let the fog in my eyes clear completely. My posture straightened. The trembling in my hands ceased as if a switch had been flipped. I almost forgot, I said, my voice ringing out with a clarity and coldness that cut through the humid air of the dining room. There is the matter of the new will. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a held breath before a scream. In the testament your father wrote exactly 1 week ago. I continued, locking eyes with my stepson. He mentioned a significant change in the primary beneficiaries. Brandon and Tiffany shot to their feet as if the chairs beneath them had suddenly caught fire. The blood drained from their faces, leaving them looking like wax figures. New will, Brandon choked out, his voice cracking. What are you talking about? There is no new will. We checked the safe. Oh, but there is. I lied. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms, watching the panic take root in their eyes. David knew about your financial situation. Brandon. He knew about the cryptocurrency crash. He knew about the $5 million you owe to those dangerous men in the city. I watched Brandon's throat work as he tried to swallow. He looked like a cornered animal. He was planning to leave the entire estate to the Children's Hospital Charity Fund, I said, delivering the final blow of my fabrication. He said he would not let his hard-earned legacy go to waste on a gambling addict. He was going to cut you off completely. Tiffany lost her composure entirely. She slammed her perfectly manicured hand onto the table, rattling the silverware. "You are a dirty liar," she screamed, her face contorted with greed and fear. "That old man is dead. He is dead, and no one knows anything. We went through his files. There was nothing there." She clamped a hand over her mouth, realizing too late that she had said far too much. Brandon turned on her with a look that promised violence, silencing her instantly. Then he swung his gaze back to me. The mask of the grieving, dutiful son had dissolved completely. In its place was a raw, ugly desperation that made him look decades older. "Sign the papers," he growled. He leaned over the table, his knuckles white as they gripped the tablecloth. "Sign them right now, or do not blame me for what happens next." I smiled, a cold, humorless curving of my lips that I knew would unsettle him. "So that is it?" I asked, speaking clearly for the benefit of the microphone hidden in my button. "You admit it? You are willing to kill me just to steal the inheritance to pay off your bookies." Brandon laughed. It was a dry, barking sound that chilled the room more than the rain outside. He straightened up, looking down at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. "You think you still have a choice. Elena," he sneered, dropping all pretense of civility. "Look at you. You are weak. You are barely conscious. That bowl of soup in front of you is your one-way ticket to go see him. Whether you eat it or not, you are not walking out of this house alive." He gestured vaguely to the room around us, asserting his dominance. "I did not want it to be messy," he said, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "I wanted you to go to sleep quietly, just like he did, but you are making this difficult." "Just like it ended for your father," I asked softly, pushing him to the edge. "Exactly," Brandon hissed, leaning in closer so I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "I switched his heart medication for sugar pills weeks ago, and when that was too slow, I gave him a little push with the digitoxin. He was weak, just like you. I am doing you a favor. Elena, I am releasing you from your misery. Now eat." "Thank you for the confession," I announced clearly, my voice projecting across the room. I raised my hand and deliberately pressed the small onyx button on my collar, triggering the signal that Frank and the tactical team were waiting for. The reaction was instantaneous. Brandon's eyes snapped to my hand and then to my face. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He understood in a fraction of a second that he had been played. He did not scream or try to run. Instead, he lunged. He vaulted over the corner of the dining table, knocking over a crystal vase, his hands reaching out to strangle the life out of me. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, animalistic hatred, but before his fingers could even graze my throat, the world around us exploded. The floor-to-ceiling glass windows that lined the garden side of the dining room shattered inward with a deafening crash. At the exact same moment, the heavy oak front door was rammed off its hinges with a thunderous boom that shook the floorboards. "Police, drop the weapon. Get on the ground." Now the commands roared from everywhere, amplified by bullhorns and the sheer volume of shouting voices. Men in heavy tactical gear swarmed into the room like a black tide, their boots crunching on the broken glass, their weapons drawn and laser sights cutting through the dust and debris. Tiffany screamed. a high-pitched sound of absolute terror that pierced through the cacophony. She abandoned Brandon instantly. She scrambled backward, her heels slipping on the polished wood floor, and tried to bolt toward the kitchen. She was likely trying to reach the sink to wash away the poison residue or find the back exit. But she did not make it 3 steps. 2 officers intercepted her, slamming her against the wall with professional force. I heard the metallic click of handcuffs snapping into place as she began to sob hysterically. Brandon was mid-air when Frank tackled him. The private investigator hit my stepson with the force of a freight train, sending them both crashing into the antique sideboard. Silverware and plates clattered to the ground. Brandon tried to fight back, swinging his fists blindly, but he was no match for the professionals. 2 uniformed officers jumped into the fray, wrenching Brandon's arms behind his back. They dragged him to the center of the room and forced him down right at my feet. His cheek was pressed hard against the floorboards. He looked up at me, gasping for air, his eyes wide with shock and a lingering, burning malice. The room was secured in under 60 seconds. A forensics team moved in immediately, navigating the scene with clinical efficiency. One agent wearing blue latex gloves carefully approached the table. He secured the bowl of mushroom soup, sealing it in a biohazard evidence bag as if it were a loaded gun. Another officer pulled the small glass vial from Tiffany's discarded purse, holding it up to the light before bagging it. The physical proof was undeniable. They had the poison, the intent, and the confession. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. I brushed a shard of glass from my sleeve and regained my composure as the chaos swirled around me. I looked down at the boy I had raised, the young man who was now a criminal writhing in handcuffs on my floor. "You underestimated me, Brandon," I said, my voice low but cutting through the noise. "And you vastly underestimated your father." Marcus pushed through the line of police officers, his face pale with adrenaline. He rushed to my side, grabbing my shoulders to steady me, his eyes frantically searching my face for injuries. "Elena, are you hurt? Did he touch you?" Marcus asked, his voice breathless. I shook my head. I stood tall and rigid, the picture of the victorious widow. But inside, as I watched the family I had spent 20 years building being dragged away by the authorities, I felt something essential shatter into a million pieces. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a hollow, aching void. But I refused to let them see me break. Not now. Not ever again. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the police station interrogation room, the facade of the loving daughter-in-law crumbled completely. Confronted with the high-definition video footage from my button camera and the clear audio recordings of the dinner table confession, Tiffany realized there was no escape. She stopped crying for Brandon and started crying for a deal. She sang like a canary, desperate to trade information for a reduced sentence. She told the detectives that Brandon was the sole mastermind. He had hatched the plan 6 months ago when his gambling debts spiraled out of control. The loan sharks had given him a strict deadline, and he decided that his father and I were the only solution to his liquidity problem. But the most chilling revelation came when the lead detective slid a plastic evidence bag across the metal table toward me. Inside was the stack of papers Brandon had been so desperate for me to sign. He peeled back the top layer, the power of attorney, to reveal a sheet of paper clipped underneath it. It was a typed letter with a forgery of my signature at the bottom. It was a suicide note. I read the words with a sickening feeling in my stomach. The letter confessed that I had poisoned David because of an affair he was allegedly having, and that I could not live with the guilt, so I was taking my own life. The plan was diabolical in its completeness. I was supposed to eat the poisoned soup and die within the hour. The police would arrive, find 2 dead bodies and a suicide note, and close the case as a tragic domestic murder-suicide. Brandon would have played the devastated son, the sole survivor of a family tragedy, and he would have inherited everything without a single question asked. I sat back in my chair, shivering despite the heat in the room. It was not enough for them to kill me. They wanted to murder my reputation as well. They wanted to bury me as a monster so that Brandon could live as a king. In the adjacent interrogation room, Brandon maintained a stony silence. He refused to look at the evidence. He refused to speak to his lawyer. He sat there with a cold, dead look in his eyes, showing absolutely no remorse for the father he killed or the mother figure he tried to frame. However, his silence did not matter when Marcus arrived with the family attorneys. Marcus revealed a final twist that Brandon had never anticipated. Suspecting his son's instability, David had secretly moved the majority of his liquid assets and the Novatech shares into an irrevocable blind trust 2 weeks before he died. The terms were explicit. Brandon could not touch a single cent. The entire estate was under my sole control as the trustee. Even if their plan had succeeded and I had died, the money would have gone directly to charity, not to Brandon. He had killed his father for a fortune that was already out of his reach. The story broke the next morning. The press descended on the station, dubbing the case the Viper Family. The image of the grieving widow turning the tables on her murderous stepson was plastered across every screen in the country to ensure there were no loopholes. I provided the forensic accountants with bank records showing the unauthorized transfers Brandon had made using my identity over the past year. I handed over every credit card statement and every forged check. I built a cage of evidence around him so tight that he would never breathe free air again. The trial was mercifully swift. With the mountain of evidence Frank and the police had secured, there was no room for defense strategies or theatrics. The video of the confession, the toxicology reports, and the forged suicide note painted a picture so damning that the jury returned their verdict in record time. Brandon and Tiffany were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. As the bailiffs led them out of the courtroom in shackles, Brandon stopped. He turned his head to look at me one last time. His face was gaunt, stripped of the arrogance that had defined him for so long. "You were never my mother," he spat out, the words echoing in the silent room. I looked him in the eye, feeling absolutely nothing but a deep, resonant calm. "And you," I replied, my voice steady and clear, "never deserved to be your father's son." He flinched as if I had struck him, then turned away and disappeared through the heavy doors. Out of my life forever. The first thing I did after the verdict was sell the villa. That house, with its glass walls and modern angles, was supposed to be my masterpiece, but it had become a tomb filled with memories of betrayal. I could not breathe there anymore. I sold it to a young couple who knew nothing of its history. I took a significant portion of the proceeds and donated it to a national foundation that supports victims of domestic violence and elder abuse. I wanted to ensure that others who found themselves trapped in their own homes had the resources to escape before it was too late. A week later, I stood before David's grave. The grass had started to grow over the fresh earth. It was a sunny day, the kind of day he used to love. I placed a bouquet of white lilies against the headstone. I was no longer the trembling, medicated widow who had stood here in the rain. I was the woman who had avenged him. I told him that he could rest now, truly rest, because the truth had been brought to light. Marcus found me there. He stood respectfully at a distance before approaching. He looked relieved to see me looking healthy again. He offered me a position back at Novatech. He spoke of a new, massive architectural project the company was launching and said he wanted me to lead the design team. He said it would be a fresh start. I looked at him and smiled, but I shook my head. I thanked him for his friendship and his help, but I declined. I told him that I was not ready to jump back into the world of corporate deadlines and boardrooms. I needed time. I needed to find out who Elena was when she was not a wife, a stepmother, or a victim. I needed to heal on my own terms. Now, I am sitting in a first-class seat, 30,000 feet above the ground. I look out the window at the city below, watching the skyscrapers shrink until they look like children's toys. The flight attendant places a glass of vintage red wine on my tray table. I pick it up and swirl the dark liquid, watching it catch the light. For the first time in months, I do not have to check the seal. I do not have to worry about the taste. I take a sip, and it tastes like grapes and oak. It tastes like safety. It tastes like freedom. Greed can turn people into monsters, but resilience and truth will always triumph. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear from you in the comments, so please tell me where you are tuning in from today and share your thoughts on the ending. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, hit the like button, and press the hype button to help this video reach more people.